Chapter 1. Ravenbrook's Shadowy Origins. Ravenbrook Asylum had always been an enigma, cloaked in the shadows of time. It stood like a sentinel on the hill, isolated from the town of Havenhill. From its inception, Ravenbrook was different. Founded by Dr. Edgar Crowley in the late 1800s, a man who claimed to have revolutionary ideas about mental health treatment. But rumors quickly spread that Crowley was as mad as the patients he sought to cure. The asylum's Gothic spires, blackened with soot and rain, loomed over the surrounding forest, an unsettling monument to forgotten souls. The building was a labyrinth of narrow corridors, sealed-off wards, and strange architectural choices, hallways that led nowhere, rooms without windows, doors that seemed to open and close by themselves. Over the years, many whispered about strange occurrences at Ravenbrook, staff disappearing without explanation, patients screaming about dark figures, and a mysterious basement that no one ever returned from. The asylum's reputation deteriorated, and when Dr. Crowley died under suspicious circumstances, many believed Ravenbrook had claimed its first victim. His successor, Dr. Samuel Huxley, took over, vowing to restore order and proper care. However, things only grew darker under his rule. Chapter 2. The Nurse's Arrival. Anna Fitzgerald had always been a dedicated nurse, deeply empathetic to her patients. She had hoped that her new job at Ravenbrook Asylum would be an opportunity to make a difference, to help those whose society had forgotten. But as her carriage approached the asylum's towering iron gates, she couldn't shake the feeling of unease gnawing at her stomach. Her first steps inside Ravenbrook only intensified her discomfort. The asylum was more like a prison than a place of healing. The air was heavy, thick with dampness and decay, and it seemed to cling to her skin. The walls were lined with fading murals, scenes of pastoral bliss painted by patients decades ago, that had long since turned grim with mold and grime. The smell of antiseptic mixed with something fouler, something rotting beneath the surface. The patients were gaunt, hollow-eyed figures who shuffled through the hallways like the living dead. Some muttered incoherently to themselves, others stared blankly at the walls, and a few flinched at any sudden movement, as though terrified of unseen forces. What struck Anna most were their hands. Many of them had thick bandages wrapped around their wrists, covering old wounds that never seemed to heal. The staff, led by the imposing Dr. Huxley, moved with mechanical precision. There was no warmth in their interactions with the patients. When Anna tried to ask questions or express concerns, she was met with thinly veiled hostility. "You're here to do a job," one of the senior nurses had snapped, "not to ask questions." Anna quickly realized that Ravenbrook was not what she had expected. Chapter 3. Echoes of the Past. Anna's first few weeks at Ravenbrook were filled with unsettling experiences. The screams she heard at night were unlike anything she had ever encountered before. Echoes of torment that reverberated through the stone walls, rattling her nerves. At first she assumed they were the cries of suffering patients in need of attention, but when she approached the nurses, they simply shrugged. "Normal around here," they would say. "You'll get used to it." But Anna never did. She found herself lying awake at night, clutching her blanket, listening to the eerie wails that never seemed to stop. On one particularly restless night, she decided to investigate. She crept down the darkened corridors, following the sounds of muffled sobs that seemed to come from the old wing of the asylum. The staff had warned her never to go there. It was where the most dangerous patients were kept, they said. But curiosity drove her forward. The old wing was even darker and more decrepit than the rest of the asylum. The doors were reinforced with heavy locks, and the walls were lined with rusting metal restraints. Anna's footsteps echoed through the empty halls, her breath coming in short, shallow gasps as she ventured deeper. As she turned a corner, she was met by a frail figure, an elderly patient who looked far too thin to still be alive. Her skin was pale and mottled, her eyes wide and haunted. She clutched a ragged blanket around her shoulders, trembling uncontrollably. "They're coming," the woman whispered, her voice barely audible. "They come every night. They take us to the depths." Anna felt a chill run down her spine. "Who comes?" she asked. But the woman only shook her head and scurried off into the shadows before Anna could get an answer. That night, Anna returned to her room, her mind racing with questions. Who were they? What did she mean by the depths? And why did the old wing feel so wrong? She resolved to keep her eyes open, to watch and learn what was really happening inside Ravenbrook. Chapter 4. The Doctor's Grasp. The following week, Anna had an unsettling encounter with Dr. Huxley. He had called her into his office for a routine check-in, but the atmosphere was anything but routine. His office was unlike any other part of the asylum, immaculately clean, with rows of neatly organized bookshelves and a large mahogany desk. The air smelled of old leather and pipe smoke. Dr. Huxley sat behind his desk, his pale fingers drumming on the surface. He studied Anna with those cold, calculating eyes of his, and for a moment she felt like one of his patients, something to be observed and dissected. "I understand you've been asking questions," Huxley said, his voice low and even. Anna shifted uncomfortably in her seat. "I've just been trying to understand the patient's conditions better." Huxley's lips curled into a thin smile. "Curiosity is admirable, but it can also be dangerous. Ravenbrook is not like other institutions. There are rules here, rules you must follow." Anna nodded, though she couldn't shake the feeling that Huxley was hiding something. His tone was condescending, as though he was speaking to a child who had wandered too far from home. "You would do well to stay focused on your duties," Huxley continued, his eyes narrowing slightly. "Leave the rest to me." After the meeting, Anna felt more determined than ever to uncover the truth. She couldn't shake the feeling that something sinister was happening behind the closed doors of Ravenbrook. Chapter 5. The Secret Journal. One day, while tidying up an old storage room, Anna stumbled upon a journal hidden beneath a pile of dusty linens. The journal was old, its pages yellowed and brittle, but the handwriting inside was clear. It belonged to a nurse named Eleanor Blackwood, who had worked at Ravenbrook over 2 decades ago. As Anna read through the journal, she realized Eleanor had been like her, young, idealistic, and determined to help the patients. But Eleanor had also started noticing strange things happening within the asylum. In one of the entries, Eleanor wrote, "There are whispers of a dark ritual taking place in the depths of Ravenbrook. The patients speak of shadowy figures who come for them at night. I tried to ask Dr. Huxley about it, but he brushed me off. I fear that something terrible is happening here, something that no one else seems to want to acknowledge." The entries grew increasingly erratic over time, with Eleanor describing horrifying events, patients disappearing in the middle of the night, strange symbols carved into the walls, and the sound of chanting echoing through the halls. The final entry chilled Anna to the bone. "They know I've been asking questions. I can feel their eyes on me, watching my every move. I fear I am next. If anyone finds this journal, please know that Ravenbrook is not a place of healing. It is a place of darkness, a place of evil. Whatever you do, don't go into the basement." Anna's hands trembled as she closed the journal. Eleanor had known the truth, and now Anna did too. But what had happened to Eleanor? And what horrors awaited her in the basement? Chapter 6. Descent into the Abyss. The journal's warning echoed in Anna's mind, but it only fueled her determination to uncover the truth. She had to know what was happening in the depths of Ravenbrook. One stormy night, when the asylum was shrouded in darkness, and the staff were busy attending to their nightly rounds, Anna made her move. She crept through the winding corridors, making her way toward the basement stairs. The air grew colder as she descended, and the walls seemed to close in around her. The basement was a different world entirely. It was a maze of narrow stone passages, lined with rusting pipes that dripped water onto the damp floor. The further she went, the stronger the stench of decay became. As she rounded a corner, she came face to face with a door, an ancient iron-bound door with strange symbols etched into the wood. The door was slightly ajar, and beyond it, she could hear the faint sound of chanting. Anna pushed the door open and stepped into a large chamber. The room was dimly lit by flickering candles, casting long shadows across the walls. At the center of the room stood a large stone altar, stained with dark patches that looked disturbingly like blood. Around the altar, a group of robed figures stood in a circle, their heads bowed as they chanted in a language Anna couldn't understand. At the center of the circle was a patient, bound and gagged, struggling against the restraints that held them to the altar. Anna's heart raced as she realized what she was witnessing. This was the dark ritual Eleanor had written about. She had to stop it, but before she could move, a hand clamped down on her shoulder, pulling her back into the shadows. She spun around to see one of the patients, a man with wild, terrified eyes. "Don't," he hissed. "They'll see you. You can't stop them." Anna tried to pull away, but the man held her tightly. "They'll take you next if you interfere," he whispered. "It's already too late." Chapter 7. A horrifying revelation. Anna watched in helpless horror as the ritual unfolded before her eyes. The chanting grew louder, and the robed figures raised their hands toward the ceiling. The air in the room seemed to thicken, and a strange energy pulsed through the chamber. Then, with a final guttural chant, the room fell silent. The patient on the altar stopped struggling, their body going limp as the light seemed to drain from their eyes. The robed figures slowly turned toward Anna, their faces hidden beneath their hoods. One of them stepped forward, pulling back their hood to reveal Dr. Huxley's face. "You should have stayed out of this, Anna," he said, his voice calm and measured. "But now that you're here, perhaps you can help us with the next ritual." Anna's blood ran cold. She had been caught, and there was no way out. Dr. Huxley and the robed figures advanced on Anna, their intentions clear. She tried to back away, but the patient, who had warned her before, grabbed her arm, pulling her toward a hidden passage in the wall. "We have to go," he urged. "Now." Anna hesitated for only a moment before following him into the narrow passage. They ran through the dark tunnels beneath the asylum, the sound of footsteps echoing behind them. The walls seemed to close in, and the air grew thick with dust and mildew. Finally, they emerged into a small hidden room, one that looked like it hadn't been touched in decades. The patient collapsed against the wall, gasping for breath. "Who are you?" Anna asked, her voice trembling. The man looked up at her, his eyes filled with fear. "I was a doctor here once," he said. "Before I found out what they were really doing, I tried to stop them, but they turned me into one of their patients instead. I've been hiding ever since, trying to help where I can." Anna stared at him in disbelief. "What do we do now?" The man shook his head. "There's no escaping Ravenbrook," he said. "Not until the ritual is complete." Chapter 9. The Final Twist. Anna's mind raced as she tried to comprehend the enormity of what she had uncovered. The dark rituals, the sacrifices, the evil that lurked beneath the asylum. It was all real, but there was one thing she hadn't anticipated. As the man spoke, Anna began to feel a strange sensation creeping over her. Her vision blurred and her body grew heavy, as though something was draining the life from her. She looked down at her hands and gasped in horror. They were covered in blood. The man smiled, a slow, twisted smile that sent a shiver down Anna's spine. "You see, Anna," he said, his voice growing darker, "you were part of the ritual all along. We've been preparing you for this moment from the beginning." Anna tried to scream, but her voice was lost in the void. The walls of the hidden room seemed to close in around her, and the last thing she saw was the man's face, twisted, demonic, before darkness consumed her. Epilogue. The Asylum's Grip. Anna was never seen again. The staff at Ravenbrook told the townsfolk that she had simply left, unable to cope with the demands of the asylum. But those who knew the truth, the patients who still whispered of dark rituals and shadowy figures, knew better. The asylum remained, a looming presence on the hill, its walls holding the secrets of countless souls who had been lost to its dark embrace. And though the ritual was complete, the evil within Ravenbrook was far from defeated. The nightmare continued, waiting for the next unwitting soul to stumble into its grasp.
Thanks for watching. If you enjoyed the story and want more chills in your life, don't forget to hit that like button and subscribe to the channel. Tap the bell icon to make sure you never miss a new horror tale. Sweet dreams, if you can sleep.